Laurie Pappas plodded with a slow, heavy pace against resistance. This was in her youth, and her dad had her committed when she was 16 years old. She was rebellious, and her mother was convinced that Laurie was possessed. But Laurie escaped, and armed only with her determination, she set out to become the architect of her life. I absolutely love that phrase. She had no emotional support or safety net. Now, this is where her story really gets interesting.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Welcome, Laurie. So glad to have you on Never Ever Give Up Hope today.
Oh, thank you, Carol. I've been really looking forward to this. Thank you.
And the more I read your story, the more anxious I am not only to hear more about it, but also to have you share your pain and your success with my audience. So let's start with those early days. A little bit of what I said in the intro for you, and just tell us a little bit deeper your story.
Well, like you said in the intro, my childhood was a bit unusual in that it wasn't unusual in that I lived in an imaginary world, because I think a lot of your listeners probably do
Yes.
as a coping mechanism, as we make this fantasy world for ourselves because it's too painful to really be in the real world, and we really don't have those skills at that time.
Right.
And my mother really was religiously delusional. I mean, she lived in this other world, and and so it was difficult being around her, and I didn't like that. So I isolated myself. But one of the things I did have going for me is that I was bright, and I had a photographic memory, so I didn't have any problem in school. But the time came when I went into those teenage years when everything came to a head, and I refused to do her bidding. She ended
Mm.
up taking me to a pastor that was equally convinced that I had a devil. So therefore, they put me in this room and sat real close in my face, asking me what my name was and to command the devil to get out of me, and so on and so forth. And I remember sitting there thinking, these two people are really weird. They're just really, really screwed up. And I brushed it off, but it did impact me profoundly.
Mm.
Because in order to cope, I started hyperventilating and disassociating. Well, one thing led to another, and the friction in our house continued, and my father didn't like friction, and I was hauled off to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist had told my dad it was he really needed to do something about my mother. And my father refused because he was a very proud Greek immigrant, and he was not going to admit that he had married damaged goods. And
Mm.
so they decided to put me in the mental hospital to supposedly teach me to cope with my mother. Well,
Huh.
as soon as I got in there, they start feeding you these pills. And one day I remember I was stumbling down a hallway and I must have passed out because I came to laying on my bed and a girl from a neighboring room was in there with another gal and moaning about how she had just had a shock treatment and that they were threatening that they were going to do a lobotomy on her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, this was back in, I'm 76. So all this stuff was happening in the mid 60s. And those of you that are a little older will remember the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Yes, yes.
with Jack Nicholson. Well, there we go. I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't let that happen to me. And I was able to connect the dots and realize that the problem was the pills, that I had to stop swallowing the pills so that I could think clearly and figure out
Right.
how to get out. And so that was my first aha moment. And I did. I stopped swallowing the pills. I started faking it, putting it in my mouth, pretending to swallow. And and I managed to figure out how to get out of there. I figured out what they needed to hear me say to give them confidence. And then I got discharged with the when I promised that I would never live in the same household as my mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Well, uh, anyway, so I was put on a train and I went across country by myself, barely
My
17.
goodness.
I know. And I was on my own. I had just celebrated my 17th birthday when I got on that train. And this was back in, okay, so this was in 1966. And that was right at the height of the hate Ashbury free love,
Oh, yes, yes.
remember? And I ended up living in a one room in a row house just a mile from Haight Ashbury. And my company were the folk singers of that era. I got a job working in a J.C. Penney's delivery area of their department store where I'd wrap packages. And then I would go home at night and I would listen to Joan Baez and Glenn
Oh, hey,
Yarborough,
right, right.
Marianne Faithfull, that whole era. And they became my friends. Eventually, I decided I wanted to go to school. And I met a girl in the cafeteria and she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I want to go to school too. Why don't we go to UCLA?" And I said, "Okay." So I called my dad, and the deal was that I had to come home for Christmas. So went home for Christmas, took the college, I had already aced the college board, so I had no problem getting into UCLA. But a long story short, he at the last second, he decided I couldn't go, and I was forced to go to this Bible school. Anyway, one thing after another, I made it. I made it because I didn't swallow what people were saying. But the impact of that was I developed a very tough exterior.
Right, of course.
You just develop this shell where, yes, you're very strong on the outside, doing very difficult things, but that's really because you've developed a lizard skin. You're not letting anything come inside. And I became very numb. And the only feelings I could feel were really being lonely and sad. But I still had the same drive, I still had the same intellect. And so my sense of achievement and worth all transferred into my work. And I was fortunate to get into the computer industry in early days. Um, right at the forefront of the personal computer. I discovered a market niche that needed those systems, complicated custom manufacturing, small businesses. It was a very male-dominated world, but
Oh, yes, I bet.
yeah, but the fact that I was a young female really worked to my advantage because these guys were really curious about, well, how can this broad think she can tell me how to run her business? So I got the appointment and, I kind of knew the answer, how to help them become more efficient. I ended up starting my own software company and we grew, and it was back in the era when the computers were going through a transition. And we became, because I didn't have money, we became one of the first companies in the world to really use telesales and webinars and
Oh,
remote.
really?
Yeah, because I couldn't afford traveling. I couldn't afford
Right,
doing
right.
anything else. You figure it out. And I was fortunate with that.
Now, at one point, you did get married, correct?
Oh God, I've gotten married a number of times. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, let's talk about it.
Okay. So the first one, I was 19 and it was just a couple years after having gotten out of the nut house. I was desperate to be loved. I really wanted
Right.
to be loved. And I met a guy that I thought really loved me, but you know, I mistook the fact that he was really stubborn for decisiveness. And um, but we had a pretty good time for a couple years, and I ended up having two wonderful daughters with him. And that marriage lasted 11 years.
Oh, wow.
And the good news, though, was that because he wasn't the brightest guy around, I had to learn to really understand what it would take for him to think something was his idea.
Oh,
And,
right, right.
and that turned me into a really good salesperson,
Yes,
you know? So you just never know what benefit you're going to get out of a struggle,
exactly.
right?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So that marriage lasted 11 years, and so I had two little girls, like 4 and 6, when I got divorced, and then I ended up starting my own business, and really had no business doing it because I didn't have any money. But eventually, I ended up getting married again, and that one lasted 25 years.
No way.
It did,
Wow.
but it really should have lasted about a day.
Oh,
you know, but you just do whatever. You kind of take the easiest route out, don't you? You just kind of go with what you know, and you figure out strategies to just get by. And so yeah, I was married 25 years to him, and I'd had a son, but that was in between marriages, and I thought that the second husband was good for my youngest daughter and my son, and it turned out not so much. But anyway, I was busy with the business,
right.
and I didn't deal with it.
So, what was happening in your career at this point, even though you were struggling?
That was the time when I was growing my business, and my business became really successful, and I was able to sell it when I was 49. And my husband had decided it was his turn to decide where we were going to live. And so we moved out to Seattle, Washington. Before I'd lived in Minnesota. And we moved out there and bought a big house on Puget Sound. And I did volunteer work and I planted a huge garden with 3,000 plants. And I tried to golf, and oh, I hated it. I just was not cut out for retirement. But the good news is we did a lot of traveling, and
Mm,
um, And I literally traveled around the world. And because I wasn't working, I was able to really look at the lives of the people that I was interacting with. And I started thinking about, well, what if? What if that was my life? Or what if I hadn't been brought up in this religious family? What would my belief system be? And why would I believe that? Or why, why would I choose these cultural constraints versus these other constraints? And how does all that influence my behavior? I had a lot of therapy because I got the fact that even though I had tried so hard to be a super mom to my kids, that they were struggling. And I really, I loved the kids. I wanted to know how to be healthy. I was really fortunate because I had some good therapists. I was able to go to a trauma center and deal with my trauma that I really hadn't realized I had suffered. And that that was a real pivot point for me.
During this time, I mean, this covers a few years here, but what was your motivation? What kept you going? Was it a promise of a future for yourself, or what was it that that literally kept you going?
For some reason, I always knew that I was going to have an orphanage and that I was going to help children in need. I just had this innate sense that that was one of the things that I was put on earth to do. And the other part of it was I had this incredible curiosity.
Mm.
And I think that that curiosity coupled with drive, I'm somebody that my nickname was AAA because I always just ran so fast.
Oh,
Uh,
that's funny.
yeah, and I always had a real heart for helping others. I just didn't think it was fair. I always had a sense of unfairness, not that my life hadn't been fair. That didn't enter the equation.
Interesting.
Yeah, but what seemed really unfair to me, and maybe it was really the roots were in my religious background, in that being a very strict Christian woman. My mother the last thing she would say to me when I'd go to bed was that, well, if you don't ask for forgiveness of your sins, and if Jesus comes, you're going to hell. I remember as a real little kid thinking, well, that's just not fair. I mean, what about people living in Africa, that don't hear that or that believe differently? I mean, I always wondered why, I mean, how I always had a sense that every person born in the world is a special being. I've just had that innate feeling that everybody walking on this earth has the right to have a healthy life.
Did you ever have a reconnection with your parents in any way before they passed?
I intellectually forgave my mother when I was in my 30s. I emotionally forgave her when I was in my 50s going through therapy. I've never felt a grudge against them. I've found it more intellectually interesting. Is that making sense, Carol?
Sure.
Yeah,
You
because
chose you chose to forgive them.
yeah, I chose to, and you know what it is? I chose not to let them become emotional baggage.
Right.
And that's the thing that I often talk about nowadays is about as we learn to access our own wisdom, what does that really look like? And maybe you want to talk about that later, but but to me, it kind of folds into this in that it really is when you can look at what you know and eliminate the noise, eliminate that emotional baggage, or eliminate those constraints because of culture or society or family. Um, if you can just look at what it is you know without the noise and think about it over time, you'll be surprised how wise you really are. And that helps you turn your struggles, really into your strength. And I just think that's such an important message because it is really valid. It's really real. I just always felt that, I mean, I've always felt that I'm just incredibly fortunate.
And that attitude is what really made you who you are. There's no
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
We're going to take a quick break for a few seconds. And when we come back, we're going to switch gears. And I want you to share what you have learned and how you can help the audience with, I love this, your dream framework. So we're going to talk about that and also your book and your newsletter and your Facebook group. And we'll be back in just a minute.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
We have been chatting with Lori Pappas today, and she has told us an incredible story about her life, what she has learned, what she has experienced. And now we're going to listen as she tells us how what she experienced can help us. So, how did you first start thinking along these lines?
It happened when I was living in Ethiopia, and I should say how I got there is when I was traveling in Niger, a little girl came up to me begging, and we were like 9 hours from anywhere. And what she really wanted was my water bottle. And
Oh, really?
yeah, because if you have a water bottle, you have a chance to live. It really is. I mean,
Oh,
it's, of course, I gave it to her, but I kept thinking, that little girl is the same age as my granddaughter, Ella. And Ella did nothing right to be born my granddaughter. It was just the luck of the cards. And this little girl, begging for that water bottle, did nothing wrong to be born in this hot, disease-ridden,
right.
really difficult environment. At that moment, remember I had said that I basically had failed retirement. I just really had struggled with it. Uh, I thought, well, what if I could do something to change the trajectory of of children like this? And being an overachiever, I thought, well, why not? So I ended up I ended up founding an international charity, and I um, I decided I was going to run it, and I moved to Ethiopia because I was going to work down in the South Omo, which was one of the most marginalized areas of the world. It still is, and I I started working with these people, and I built an organization and hired a lot of local people, and during the day I'd be struggling with issues with the government and with communication and all kinds of stuff. And at night when I would get home, and at this point I had a house up in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, because that's where the main office was. And I'd be all ready to sit down with a glass of wine and read a book, and then the lights would go out. And so I would be left with three little candles. That would be my only light. I couldn't do anything but think. And I
Mm,
started reflecting on, the challenges faced by that little girl in Niger and the challenges and struggles of my kids and the challenges and struggles I had had with employees and with my family and so forth.
right.
And I realized that those struggles were really the keys to accessing my wisdom.
Mm,
And and I started thinking about, well, how would I do that? How could I talk about what it is that I'm experiencing? And and I came up with the dream model to help me, and then as something that I could use to convey what I had learned to other people. And so the dream is really an acronym, and it's for D is for desire. What is it that you want? What is it that you need? What is the desire? And then
mm-hmm,
R is for reflect. And that's what I was talking about. That's, well,
mm-hmm,
what do you know? But you've got to eliminate the noise. You've got to think about what you know without it being colored by your emotional baggage, by your supposed to, by your fears and your
right.
myths. And E is explore. Well, what else could we learn? What else is there that might be helpful to reach that desire? And then A is for acknowledge. And acknowledge is really two parts. One is, hey, you are resilient. You're courageous. You're standing. You're here. And the other part of acknowledge is you're going to make mistakes. And life can really suck. I mean, and you can really get thrown some curveballs. And that's reality. But that's why M for mantra is so helpful, because mantras are a word or a saying that encourage you and that can keep you focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve. And I find that that dream model not only works for me, but it works for others. And so that's a thread that goes throughout my book to help people
Okay.
learn how to establish a dream.
And is the explanation of dream um, in in your book?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Because every chapter has dream activities at the end. For example,
Okay.
the first chapter is winning, say yes to winning with the cards you were dealt. So that chapter talks about my early days, and throughout the book, it is basically written with the arc of my story, also the story of one of the most amazing women I met over in Ethiopia, Gulu Bola. And every chapter also highlights another extraordinary, ordinary woman whose story exemplifies the point of that chapter. And then each one ends with dream activities because I want, I want people to not just have a good read. I want
Right.
people to be able to transform their struggles into their own superpower because we all have that.
So it's more than a memoir for sure.
Oh, for sure. It's really it's listed as a inspirational self-help, and that's what it's got
Okay.
the awards for, and everything is the self-help part.
And your newsletter, tell us about that.
Well, one of the things when I was finishing up my book and I was putting in these stories of these different women, I thought, that's really the most fun part of writing this book is writing about other people and what they've done. And so I started a newsletter, Sticky Thoughts, and and so it tells the story uh, of another woman and a glimpse into her path that she's taken to exemplify how she found her peace, because we all come at it from different areas. So it comes out, maybe about once a month, and
Okay.
it's very, very fun. It's called Sticky Thoughts. It's on Substack.
And that is something that you subscribe to, or how do we?
Yeah, you subscribe to everything is on my website.
Okay. All
So,
right. Okay.
the book, the newsletter, the Facebook group, it's all on my newsletter.
And the name of your website is?
LoriPappas.com.
Okay. And your Facebook group?
The Facebook group is the Wise Woman Sisterhood. And I wanted to have a place where women could connect and celebrate and share and meet other people around the world that that compliment them in some way or encourage them in some way. And it's gotten to be very fun because it's a very international group. And then we put on little workshops, free workshops, and because there's so many extraordinary women that are part of that group right now, different ones will share in a given month what it is that is kind of their specialty. And so we learn from each other. It's
Oh,
a
excellent.
learning, sharing group, and the access to that is also on my website.
And your future? Is there another book coming out, or what are you working on?
You know, I am right now I'm working on connecting, to tell you the truth. I'm working on connecting with people like you, with people that are working to try to help us magnify our voice and amplify our voice
Right.
and do good in this world. And I don't really know for sure if it's going to end up being another book. One of the things that I'm definitely available for now is I've got two major workshops that I put on. One is turning struggles into superpowers, and another one is a presentation on how two women from opposite worlds transformed 100,000 lives.
Oh,
So,
wow.
you know, that's kind of what's going on this month.
And those, do you do those regularly, like every month, or?
It all depends upon when people ask me to do them.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
But all that information, if people connect with you on your website, they're going to get all that.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
and
All
the
right.
best place to really chat with me is in my Facebook group because
Okay.
I'm very attentive there.
Okay. Fair enough. But is there anything else that I might have missed or that you would like to leave with the audience?
What I'd really like to leave with the audience is this whole idea that when you think about your struggles and you think about your challenges, to realize that inside those struggles and those challenges is a lot of wisdom that you've gathered, and that you are stronger and more resilient than you might be giving yourself credit for. And you are very, very worthy. And I would be very proud to have any one and each of you as my friend.
Oh, that's really a beautiful way to capsulize it. Thank you.
I mean it. I really do. I really, really mean it. Is that my heart just goes out to people because every single person is special. We all are special.
Are you involved at all with what's going on in Ethiopia, like what you left, or?
Well, I still have an orphanage. That was one of
Oh,
the projects that I had there there's a terrible custom down in that area where children that are born out of wedlock or have certain aspects of their birth are considered unlucky to the tribe and they're abandoned. And so I started an orphanage for these kids years ago. And now we've got two of them actually are in college, and which
Oh
is
my word.
amazing. Yes,
Wow.
because like 3% of the kids that take the national exam pass it. And we've got two of them that did. Um, and my granddaughter and I are actually going there in February to visit. And it's so exciting. Yeah. So definitely still stay in contact. I was forced out of the country with the unrest, but we were able to keep the orphanage and we were able to stay in contact. So that's wonderful.
What a legacy to leave. Wow. Thank you for the challenge. Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing on Never Ever Give Up Hope.
Thank you, Carol. It's been my absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.